What's up, Renegades? Welcome back to another episode of the Just Wiggin' It podcast. I'm Tattoo Tom. This week's episode is brought to you, as always, in association with Lou and Sue Alami over at Alami Realty. For all your mortgage lending, home buying, and selling needs in the Washington, D.C. metro area, please reach out to Alami Realty. You'll find a link in the descriptions. Hey, this is episode number 6 of the Just Wingin' It podcast. Can't believe time is flying. Episodes are flying. I want to thank you guys so much for hanging with us during the first 5 episodes. We were getting our sea legs and working all the kinks and bugs out of our technology, trying to figure out what was going to work for us. And I think we're really starting to kind of get comfortable and really looking forward to getting in our groove and getting in our rhythm and producing some really good podcasts moving forward. Now, obviously, the first 5 podcasts were very heavily, childhood cancer related content. That's because I know that content back and forth, upside down, and every other which way. Plus, it's my whole life is centered and intertwined in the childhood cancer communities, in activism, in advocacy, and with programs and services that Still Brave offers. But we here at the Just Wingin' It podcast, we don't want to box ourselves in. We don't want to box you in with just the childhood cancer content. So we're going to kind of adjust our sails and shift directions and gears a little bit this week and take things into a slightly different direction. Now, obviously, it will be hard to 100% shy away or get away from childhood cancer because, like I just said, every facet of my life is somehow interconnected or intertwined with childhood cancer. Everybody that I know, everything that I do somehow resonates or is motivated by my work and my activism. And this will be no exception, but it'll be a little bit different, I think. So I've mentioned in previous episodes, and some of you know, that I'm currently working on a book project. And I'm very, very excited about it. It's a collaborative effort with a professional photographer named Tamara Eden, who also happens to be a childhood cancer survivor. And we have a for real book editor named Christopher Campbell. Christopher is an old skydiving buddy of mine, but he's also got like 600 doctorates in English literature, and he's a brilliant man when it comes to this type of things. He's edited a couple of other books that went on to be picked up by major publishing houses. And he intimated to us that he's very excited about this project, and he sees a lot of potential, and so he's attached his wagons to the project because he wants to see it be a success. So we're all very excited about it. We're putting a lot of time and energy into it, and I can't wait to give you guys more information about it as we move forward. It's important to note that 100% of the sales of this book will be donated to Still Brave. Doc, Tamara, and myself are not profiting from this book. It's all to raise money for the many services and programs that Still Brave offers. Basically, the book is called Inside Out, If These Tattoos Could Talk. And what it is it's a story of a life, my life, mostly, intertwined and intermingled and told through my tattoos. So essentially, a life in ink. I've been getting, if you guys have been following me on social media for any period of time, you've probably noticed the tattoos that I get, that children with cancer will design for me, or I'll auction off a part of my body every year to raise money. And so a lot of those tattoos have obviously powerful, amazing stories behind them. But I've been getting tattooed for many decades, and a lot of the tattoos that I got well before I was, thrust into the childhood cancer community when my daughter was diagnosed in 2007. So there are a lot of interesting and provocative stories behind a lot of my tattoos. Now, many of my tattoos don't really have any stories behind them, and those tattoos, but those tattoos won't be featured in this book. This book will be mostly about the ones that have stories and history and compelling and provocative tales to tell, as it were. So, I'm going to go ahead and let me back up and tell you a quick story. I got my very first tattoo when I was 12 years old. I stole some India ink from Mrs. Gilmore's 7th grade art class at Gilmore Middle School. And I went home and I locked my bedroom door, and I took a sewing needle and some thread, and I dipped it in the Indian ink, and I jabbed and sticked and poked a little cross in my arm. And I had to hide that tattoo from my parents for years, which wasn't an easy task. But somehow I pulled it off. So anyway, I got my first tattoo at 12 years old. So I've been getting tattooed for many, many, many years. And so it's tonight in an effort to get you guys interested and feeling a little bit about the project that we're working on. I'm going to read for you an excerpt from one of the chapters. Now, obviously, the backstory and the context of this excerpt that I'm going to read is going to be a little bit lost on you because you'd have to read the remainder of the book. And I want to point out that this is a very, very rough working draft. It hasn't been to the editor yet, and it's, we're going to have a lot of adjectives changed and a lot of things worked out. But I think you'll get the point. You'll get an idea of my writing style. You'll get an idea of the direction that some of the stories are going to go. The beautiful part about this book is that no two stories will be the same. No two tattoos are the same. My writing style is going to be different with each and every chapter because the things that I was going through in my life at that time, or what inspired me or motivated me to get that tattoo at that time, will be what I talk about. And a lot of those things have changed and evolved over the years. So it was really a fun project for me to be working on because I've learned a lot about myself and the evolution and the progress, for lack of a better word, that I've made in my life over the years. So without further ado, I'm going to read to you an excerpt from the chapter called The Hawk. Now, the hawk is about the big bird tattoo on my neck, so I'm going to talk a great deal about the hawk and probably a couple of other things too. So let me get a sip of water and let's do this. Pete leaned down to try to grab one of us, and we were all laughing and running around having fun. But all of a sudden, Pete's hat came off, and with it, his hair. I didn't know it at the time, but when Pete's father died, it traumatized him so badly that all his hair fell out, and it never grew back, even in his adulthood. When Pete's hat hit the floor with his wig in it, I started jumping up and down, screaming and pointing, "Pete, where's a wig? Pete, where's a wig?" I was just a little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I didn't realize how cruel and inappropriate this behavior was. Pete didn't like it at all. And something in his face changed. He got really, really scary looking, like the guy that snapped in that movie Full Metal Jacket and killed his drill sergeant during boot camp. His eyes were dark and hollow. He stood up and dead-ass karate kicked me square in the chest with such force that it knocked the wind out of me and threw my little body back so hard into the wall that I saw stars when my head snapped back into it. Pete was a large man, and I was just a little boy. Pete then moved towards me and punched me hard in the head and the body with his closed fists. I'm not sure where or what my young cousin was doing during this time, but after a few more hits, Pete left me alone, stormed out of the house. When my aunt and my cousin came home, I tried to tell them I was hurt. I tried to tell them what happened between my sobbing. It was hard to breathe. To my utter bewilderment, they refused to believe anything I was saying, or were just unwilling to admit that Pete could have actually done that. Either that, or they knew he had done it, and they were determined to cover it up to protect him. My aunt told me over and over again in the next few days that I must have imagined it. It couldn't possibly have happened. Or perhaps Pete had just pretended to hit me, she said. Some shit like that. I was devastated that she wouldn't believe me or refuse to or whatever. My body was sore for days. I knew it had happened, but I did start to question myself. I begged my aunt, however, to let me call my mother, to tell her what had happened. And when she finally let me, she had pretty much convinced my mother that I was making the whole story up. My mother didn't believe me either. I'm sorry that I made fun of your wig, Pete. I hope you're sorry that you beat the shit out of me, too. If you are sorry about it today, then I forgive you, Pete. And I'm sorry your life was hard, too. I never saw Pete again after that summer. I never went back. Instead, I would spend my next few summers with all the other feral children from broken and divorced homes in the apartment complex that I shared with my mother and sister in PG County, Maryland. Along with all the other kids, I would begin practicing the fine arts of hustling, stealing, lying, selling, and experimenting with drugs. I reckon I was about 10 years old. Out of desperation, I began to develop ways and means to manipulate situations and people in order to get what I needed from them. At first, it was just acting out or attention-seeking behavior. I've heard it said that some children would rather be wanted for murder than not wanted at all. As I grew older, I discovered the magical properties of this manipulation, and I began to hone and perfect my skill, so much so that it soon became automatic, subconscious, second nature, and necessary for my survival. As a young adult, though, I was so blinded by my fear of being controlled or losing control that I didn't or couldn't see that that was exactly what was happening. Only now, I was doing it to myself. I was, in fact, being controlled by my need to control, and subsequently losing control of myself because of it. Wow, what a profound and insightful mouthful. But it was true. As for the hawk tattoo, it was at the time my most painful tattoo, as you can probably imagine. Interestingly enough, many years later, I found the palms of my hands to be much, much more painful, excruciatingly more painful. But that's another chapter. But the tissue on the neck is very thin and very sensitive. I had to remain perfectly still for what seemed like forever. I wanted this particular tattoo for two reasons. One was that I figured a huge tattoo across my neck would help satisfy my childhood desire for attention. Either that or frighten people, or evoke any number of other feelings or reactions or emotions out of them. Simply put, it was the silly means by which I had hoped to control. I was about 11 or 12 years old. I was walking through the woods alone one day. I loved the woods as a little boy, and I still do today. I was walking along a path I had been down many times before, thinking about everything and nothing. I stopped for a moment to tie my shoe, and when I looked up, there, not 2 feet in front of me, had landed a full-grown, red-tailed hawk, its wings fully expanded. At first, I was petrified. The red-tailed hawk has a very powerful, commanding presence, to say the least. Breathtaking. A beautiful, statuesque bird of prey. The hawk standing just over 2 feet tall and having a wingspan of over 4 feet. I was frozen with fear. He settled in front of me, his wings at his sides, and began clawing at the ground. He was well aware of me. I could tell because he was staring right at me, cocking his head back and forth from side to side, as if contemplating what he should do about me. I held my breath. My little heart began to beat faster and harder than it ever had my entire young life. I willed myself to remain perfectly still, out of the fear of provoking him. But suddenly, in my stillness, a strange sense of comfort and peace washed over me. This bird meant me no harm, and seemed just as surprised and unsure of what to do as I was. For what seemed like an eternity, and it was probably more like 2 or 3 minutes, we just looked at each other. The woods, only moments earlier filled with all kinds of sights and sounds, were now silent. All I could see was this magnificent bird, so close to me that I could have reached out and touched him. Awestruck and my fear waning, I began to slowly move my head back and forth and from side to side, in perfect unison and rhythm with the hawk. I was totally swept away by what was happening. It was dreamlike. Together, we danced. It was me who made the first move. Out of curiosity, I suppose. I slowly began to walk backward, away from the bird. I gave him the space and the respect that he so rightfully deserved, for he was magnificent, and I was nothing compared to him. When I had backed up about 10 feet or so, he spread his wings and took flight. He flew right towards me, and yet I was not the least bit afraid. He flew over my head, so close that I could see the sharpness of his talons. I could actually smell him, and his wings created a push of air that blew back my hair. As I watched him fly away and soar from my sight towards wherever it is that hawks go, I fell to the ground, my head spinning, and quite unsure of what had just taken place. Perhaps he had seen me from the sky and decided on his own to stir my soul, or perhaps the gods had whispered to his heart, and that is why we spent time together that day. I can't really say, but for whatever the reason, he had indeed taken the time, from whatever it is that hawks do, to dance with a lonely little boy. I never spoke of that day in the woods with the hawk to anyone. As time went by, I thought less and less about it. But recently, as I began this book project, I had to ask myself, why the hawk tattoo, Tom? And then, like a surreal gift, if only for a whisper of time, I was that little boy again, sitting in the woods, my head spinning, quite unsure of what had just happened. I miss that kid. So there you have it. Yeah, I hope that you'll keep your eyes and your ears open for more details as we get closer to a book release date. I hope that, I piqued your interest a little bit. There's a lot of really cool stories behind my tattoos. And that was just one of them. So I have a couple of announcements before we move forward. Some of the upcoming projects and things that Still Brave has going on. We have another rally at the National Cancer Institute on Bethesda, Maryland, June 15th at noon. Come out as we explain to the National Cancer Institute why 4% is not enough. You can find a link in the description. The Moab 240 race is coming up in October. Lauren, Jewel, and I are going to run 240 miles through the Moab Desert. You can find a link in the description. The tattoo and lottery auction is going on, and if you want me to give you more information about that, follow the link in the description, because all I'm going to tell you today is tax deductible tattoos. Enough said. We also have a new clothing line with all kinds of cool Still Brave, Savage Kindness logos and stuff. You can find leggings, hoodies, t-shirts, all kind of cool stuff. Link in the description. Lou and Sue will be guests on the podcast on the May 12th episode. You guys have heard me talking about Lou and Sue Lamy. You'll get a chance to see them and find out why they are not just your average realtors. But beyond that, you're going to find out why they're my friends and why we get along so well. They're going to be great guests, and we're really excited to talk about what they do, how we got to know each other, the barn project they're sponsoring. It's going to be a really cool episode, and they don't call Sue the Godfather for nothing. And that's because he gets shit done, like I've told you. I dig them. I dig them much. You will find links in the description for all of those events, and I'd ask you humbly to please share this podcast. Let your friends and families know that, this podcast is out there and it's interesting. Hopefully you think it's interesting, and that it's all to benefit Still Brave Childhood Cancer Foundation and the many programs and services that we offer the community here in the Washington, D.C. metro area and also the surrounding states. We're all over the place now. We wish we were a national foundation, but one day we hope to be. All right, so moving right along, we're going to go into the, at least it's my new favorite segment of the podcast. It is the Who Is This Dude Anyway segment. And this segment is basic. I feel like a little bit redundant telling you who this dude is anyway, because I just gave you so much information in that story about the Hawks tattoo, about who I am, or some of the history that I have. But this segment, it really isn't about me. This segment is about people, books, music, movies, things and people and events, occasions that have inspired or motivated me. So while it's called Who Is This Dude Anyway, it's not really about me. It's just about the things that molded and sculpted the man that I am today. So today, I want to share with you one of my musician inspirations, Fela Anikulapo Kuti. Fela was a Nigerian musician. He dead-ass invented an entire genre of music by himself called Afrobeat. He was a pretty talented musician. He played the saxophone, guitars, drums, keyboards, trumpet, and he sang. Afrobeat is a complex fusion of jazz, funk, psychedelic rock, and traditional Nigerian chants and rhythms. Fela was also a human rights activist. Many people refer to him as the African Bob Marley for obvious reasons and many not so obvious reasons, if you know what I mean. Fela Ransom Kuti was his original name, but he considered that to be his slave name. So he changed his name to Fela Anikulapo Kuti. Loosely translated, Anikulapo means control over death. Fela was an interesting character. Once he recorded a song, he never ever performed that song live again. Many concert promoters would offer him tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to perform his old songs. Fela simply refused. It was never about money for Fela. Fela was like Grateful Dead. He would produce songs that were 20, 30, even 60 minutes long. And, record producers were, hungry for radio-friendly music that was, 3 minutes long and songs that were 3 minutes. And Fela said, I wouldn't even know how to do that. I thought that was cool. He had songs that were titled such amazing titles as Water, Get No Enemy. A song that one of my favorites is You Give Me Shit, I Give You Shit. Another song was Teacher, Don't Teach Me No Nonsense. Teacher, Don't Teach Me Nonsense. Fela had a communal compound that he used to house his family, band members, and many others in Lagos, Nigeria. It was fully self-supporting and even had its own free medical health clinic. In 1977, Fela and his band released an album called Zombie. It was a scathing attack on the Nigerian soldiers, and they used the zombie metaphor to describe, the methods used by the Nigerian military. The album was a big hit, but it legit pissed off the Nigerian government. And so 1,000 Nigerian soldiers raided his compound, and they brutally and severely and viciously beat Fela, and they threw his mother out a window, his elderly mother, and she died. And Fela's answer to this was to have her coffin dragged to the barracks of the Nigerian troops that came in and attacked his compound, and he dropped it right on the general's steps. And he wrote 2 songs about it. And that's intense. Fela was no joke. In 1979, he formed his own political party called MOP, Movement of the People. He also ran for president of Nigeria twice. Now, this one, I'm just going to tell you this fact. This is interesting, but it certainly isn't inspiring to me. Fela, in 1978, he married 27 women at one time. Later on in life, he wound up divorcing all 27 of them, but for a short period of time, he was in the Guinness Book of World Records as the man who married the most women at one time. I could barely handle one wife. I couldn't imagine 27, but Fela, it was a different breed. His record company once gave him a Mercedes-Benz 280 limo, and Fela used that limo to haul fish and charcoal and filthy wood. He had no respect for the German engineering or the gift of the car. He used it, as a work truck, essentially. Some of the musicians that Fela inspired, and they sort of, a lot of them were, their music, you could hear hints of the Afrobeat, were bands like George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Beyonce even. And Paul McCartney once said that Fela and his band was the best live band he had ever seen. He said when Fela started playing, he wept uncontrollably with joy until Fela stopped. Stevie Wonder was a big fan. James Brown, interestingly enough, influenced Fela. Fela's funk sort of angle came, from James Brown, the godfather of funk and soul. And but later on in life, James Brown saw Fela and his band playing at a club, and at the time, Bootsy Collins was playing bass in James Brown's band. And after the show, and this is coming from the James Brown band, they said Fela and his band were the funkiest cats we have ever heard in our life. Miles Davis called Fela a life-transforming artist. In 2009, Fela, a Broadway musical, premiered on Broadway. The Broadway production received 11 2010 Tony nominations and actually won 3 of them. It's about a musical based loosely, or a little bit more than loosely, on Fela's life. Throughout his career and his life, Fela was arrested over 200 times and endured numerous vicious beatings. But in spite of his arrests, and he never stopped writing political lyrics. And he continued to produce his own albums until he died from age-related complications in August 1997. The reason most of you have never heard of Fela, despite all that he was and all of those he influenced, is because, simply put, he was just too cool, man. He was not at all worried about selling records. He was more worried about not selling out to the man. And he was not really interested in being a global superstar at that expense. Fela Anikulapo Kuti, the black president. Fela was an OG renegade. Anyways, listen, that was one of my fun segments. I want to thank you guys for joining me on this episode. Apologize for the cough. I got a frog in my throat today. But again, I want to thank you guys so much for hanging in there with us. We got some exciting episodes coming up, not the least of which will be the one with Lou and Sue Alami on May 12th. So we'll see you guys next week for another episode of the Just Winging It podcast. Still brave, Shayla. Still brave, baby.